Welcome everyone to Standard 2D. In this presentation we will analyze major trade patterns as they existed in the world in 1500 AD. Our essential understanding for this standard is even though we don't have the trains and planes and cars that we have today, trade did exist. There were links between Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and Europe 500 years ago, and trade existed between these regions of the world. They didn't exist in isolation from each other. These regional trade patterns that we're going to see in this presentation established links of people, products, ideas that moved along these trade patterns. Our essential question, pretty much a map standard, what were the regional trading patterns around 1500 AD? Your job's really to be able to identify on a map and explain where these trade routes went. The standards lay out some pretty specific trade routes and trade patterns that we're responsible for knowing. Probably most familiar to you from your World 1 classes are the Silk Routes or the Silk Roads. We have the Indian Ocean maritime routes, one which may be new to you, the Trans-Saharan routes, the Western European river and sea routes, the South China Sea routes, and the Northern European to the Black Sea routes. So we'll take a look at each of these on a series of maps so that we can envision where these routes went. As we mentioned, the Silk Route you probably learned about in World 1. This was really the Interstate 95 of trade routes. This was the big one, linking Europe, the Middle East, India, China, crossing Asia through all these empires, and a lot of products, a lot of ideas, religions, disease, all kinds of things move across the Silk Route as it travels. European merchants would come across, keeping in mind that this was a period of time where Europe was relatively backwards compared to India and China. This was where the good stuff was, and then for any merchant who could make it back, this trip took on average about 6 months to go back and to go across the Silk Route. If you made it back, there was huge profits to be had back in Europe for merchants who made it back with the products of India, China, and the rest of Asia. The Indian Ocean maritime routes. By maritime, we're referring to the sea. Okay, so these were water routes that crisscrossed the Indian Ocean. Okay, and these stopped in places along the coast of Africa, okay, along the Arabian Peninsula, around India, and down into southeastern Asia. So the traders who were and merchants who were doing business on the Indian Ocean maritime routes were largely traveling by boat across the Indian Ocean. The Trans-Saharan route, Saharan in this case refers to the Sahara Desert. So these trade routes linked, really if we want to apply our empires, would have been the Ottoman Empire down to the Songhai Empire in 1500. Okay, so crisscrossing the Sahara Desert in northern Africa was the Trans-Saharan routes. The South China Sea routes, over here, this area of the Pacific is known as the South China Sea. Again, China had a lot of products, a lot of things developed in China, and those products were exchanged along the coast of China, again down into Southeast Asia, along the South China Sea routes. Up here in Western Europe is crisscrossed by a number of rivers like the Rhine and the Rhone, the Danube. These are major rivers in Europe, and a lot of trade took place on these rivers and also along the coast of Europe, traveling sea routes. So we see the purple lines here indicating some of the routes here, some of the inland rivers. Again, it's always easier to move products by boat or It's usually easier over long distance if it's possible to move by boat as opposed to by land. And in Western Europe, it was the river and the sea that most trade was done along. And then our last trade route are these Northern European to the Black Sea routes, coming down from Scandinavia through Russia and down to the Black Sea and the Ottoman Empire. Going back 500 years, it might not seem like an obvious link, but Russia has always been more connected to the Middle East in terms of trade than it has been to the rest of Europe. And that goes back to these long established trade routes, even 500 years ago, that had Russia and Northern Europe getting access down to the Black Sea and doing trade with the empires of the Middle East. Trade just developed that way down to the Middle East as opposed to Western Europe. You then see the effect of that in things like Russian architecture, which is a little more in common with the Middle East than it does with Western Europe. So if we tie all this together, this would be what our map would look like around 1500, or me drawing the map on the computer. We see the red line here is the Silk Route or the Silk Road, crisscrossing Asia and linking Europe to the empires of India and China. We see the South China Sea routes, okay, here along the coast of China and down into southeastern Asia, represented with the green line. We have the blue line here across the Indian Ocean, our Indian Ocean maritime routes. We have this line across the Sahara Desert, which were the trans-Saharan routes. The pink line coming down from Northern Europe, and this being the Black Sea here, the Northern Europe to Black Sea routes. And then our purple lines over here in Western Europe, where trade was conducted along the rivers and the sea. So that's our world trade patterns in 1500.